Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, the 2021 State of the Academic Libraries Benchmark Survey, a special preview and panel discussion, brought to you by Library Journal and sponsored by ProQuest. I'm Joshua Bean for Library Journal, just popping in for a minute for a little housekeeping. First up, your screen is completely customizable. You can resize any of the windows and move them around, so feel free to adjust as needed to get the most out of your desktop space. If you accidentally close any of the windows, you can bring them back up by clicking on the appropriate widget at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for our presenters during the webcast, you can submit those to the Q&A window at any time, and we'll address those at the end of the webcast. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list window, and you'll be able to download your CE certificate from the certification window once you've met the viewing requirements. You can tweet us about this event at Library Journal with the hashtag LJProQuest. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, just click on the help widget where you can find the system requirements and FAQs. And if that doesn't resolve your issue, you can send me a note through the Q&A window. So with all that out of the way, I'll go ahead and hand things off to Katy to get us started on today's presentation. Take it away, Katy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you're here with us to discuss the state of academic libraries and the recent survey that was conducted in collaboration with Library Journal and Ex Libris. I'd like to introduce our panelists who will be joining us. We have some of the best thinkers from within libraries today here to talk about the state of the academic library. We have Jane Burke joining us from Ex Libris, Sandra Morden from Queen's University in Ontario, Tracy Elliott from Florida Gulf Coast University, and Alan Jones from the New School, and of course me, Katy Aronoff from Ex Libris. I'll pass things over to Jane to give us a brief introduction to the survey and the general lay of the land with academic libraries, and then we'll return to the panel for the Q&A portion of the discussion.
Thank you, Katy, and I want to thank everyone very much for joining. Sorry we were a couple minutes late with a couple technical challenges. We're here today to talk about the State of the Academic Library Survey overview for 2021, but more importantly, we're here to hear our panelists comment on specific sections of the survey and to take your questions and answers. This is the third time that ProQuest, Ex Libris, and Library Journal have cooperated to field a survey. And I think it's very important that to say that this one, because it was done in the spring of 2021, really assesses the impact of the pandemic. You know, last year we fielded the survey just as the pandemic was going to get started, so we couldn't tell quite as much as we can this year. And I hope that's going to be significant for you. The survey was 30 questions. We asked people for lots of comments. We got 1,843 responses, so we got quite a broad set of responses. And we fielded the survey in 7 different languages, so there is a good global perspective here as well. The responses to the questions form the basis for the report. The report has not been widely issued, although you may have seen last week a little blurb from Library Journal with some of the high-level conclusions. And what we're going to do today is we're going to try to dig deeper into certain sections of the survey, but of course we're going to urge you to read the whole thing. In the entire report, when it is published, you'll see that the results have been categorized and charted. And it's really quite interesting to watch charts about these various questions and see how you and your peers all responded. So there's an overall chart for each of the questions, and then there are also charts by region of the world, by the enrollment size of the institution, and by the degrees that the institutions grant. So once you actually get your hands on the report, please be assured you're going to see a lot of detailed information. The survey, of course, was really designed to help you. It's really focusing on you. It's focusing on academic libraries worldwide. It's designed to let you compare your library to others of the same size, in the same geography, perhaps across the world. And it's also designed from some of the questions to let you assess the library's relationship within your institution. So you're going to see several of the questions, and we're going to have some discussion about some of that. Overall, of course, we were trying to identify your view of key missions of academic libraries today, your view of challenges, how you think the library, your library, and others are connected to the broader institution. Look at the breadth of challenges. Are some challenges more geographic? Are some truly global? And also gather your comments and publish them back to you in terms of the future issues that libraries will face. Our panelists really are eminent, and we're very grateful for their participation today. They've been chosen to be able to speak with authority on these issues. We have not asked them to address every question. That would be impossible. And in fact, we have not asked them to address every aspect of even the questions they're looking at. We've tried to pick the ones that we think are most important to you right at this point in time. In terms of just high-level results, to do just a tiny preview, what we saw from the survey is 66% of you see your budgets decreasing or flat. That's obviously the primary challenge that's coming through here. You're all saying that you are likely to implement changes to support remote learners. I would say even more changes than those you were forced into with the pandemic. I think we believe that more remote learning is really here to stay. When it comes to one of our heart processes in academic libraries, metadata creation, what you've told us is there's kind of an uncertain future here. It's kind of a half and half split about those of you who are looking at something like linked open data and some of you who are not. Resource sharing comes across as having been impacted hugely by the pandemic, obviously. When you couldn't get to print collections, you had to rely on other people and what they could do to help you. And so we're seeing you're reporting to us changes both in form and function of resource sharing. And you're also telling us a little bit about what you see on the horizon, which I have to say is coming through as true ebook lending. And finally, in terms of the areas of the library's affiliation with both teaching and learning and research at the institutions, strong support for the library's role in affordable learning, and strong support for the library's role in access to scholarly resources. So that's just to kind of give you an overview. And now what we're going to do is we're going to let the panel speak. Katy is going to she's going to put questions in front of them, and they're all going to give you their sense of those various issues. So Katy, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jane.
I'm going to go to first area. Is that okay?
Yes, that's great. And thank you for driving the slides. So the first set of questions that we have for our panelists focuses on library practices with particular attention to the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we know is something that has received increasing attention in the last year or so and is really on the forefront of our minds as we think about new initiatives in the library. I'd like to start with Sandra, and I'd like to think about this, something very interesting from the survey. Almost 37% of respondents said that if their library budget was magically increased by 25%, they would invest in DEI initiatives. So what we're interested in hearing about is which DEI initiatives do you hear libraries increasing their attention to? What are some of the things that you've tried at your institution? Bearing in mind that budgets are always a concern, what are some of the projects that libraries can start that are low cost or maybe even no cost? Of course, bearing in mind that staff time is a cost as well. We're not just talking about things that have a cost in terms of dollars. And again, starting with Sandra, I'd like to move through the panel and hear what you're thinking in this area.
Thanks, Katy, and greetings from Kingston, Ontario, everyone. I would like to, this is a great question because I think there's a huge collective will everywhere for us to embrace DEI in all its diversity, you could say. And I would like to focus on highlight one particular focus that is big in Canada. That is, we tend to use the term EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and add an extra I for indigeneity. The will to help focus on improving access to Indigenous resources and provide welcoming spaces for Indigenous people and encourage them even to go into our profession and be comfortable and welcome in all ways is a big focus in Canada, coming out of largely the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that finished in 2018. Time passes quickly as I watch. Not able to, but there are lots of things we can do. One, that's low cost. We have to learn. We all need to learn things before. It's very complex. It's not a homogeneous kind of situation. There are many, there's much learning that has to go on there. We can do things that we already are planning, like with spaces, trying to make them welcoming, and we've done a number of things with Indigenous theming in the spaces. We're also focusing on what actually is in our collections already. There's some very interesting collections that we can highlight, and also really in our special collections and archives, there's some amazing resources that have been used for things like experiential learning for students, and even for treaty work, legal work related to treaties. So one thing I'll just quickly say is I think we need to encourage Indigenous and other diverse groups into our profession, and probably need to consider redefining qualifications. That's something that we've thought about. What are those equivalent backgrounds? How can we open that up? So I might suggest those are a few things to think about.
Great. Tracy, over to you next. Your thoughts on these questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or to use the Canadian angle, EDII.
So for us at Florida Gulf Coast, EDI has definitely taken center stage. We just completed a 2030 strategic plan, so to take us through the decade, and EDI is one of our strategic initiatives. To do so, one thing libraries can do that we're doing is we put together a committee. Most of you probably already have them, and we've made some guiding principles very clear to ourselves and to our institution about not trying to tell the story of others who are different from us, and allowing our diverse community here at FGCU tell their own stories. And for instance, we have an exhibit that we're planning for our special collections and university archives on the Black experience in Southwest Florida. And rather than those of us who are primarily white and middle-aged women in our library, we are asking our community members, those in the community, to tell their stories and help us plan this exhibit from their point of view rather than from our own, which costs nothing for anyone to do.
That's such an important point, and I think Sandra said something similar. It costs nothing to learn, so right. We can all do that. Alan, over to you to wrap up this question. Your thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, certainly there's things that we could be doing at low or no cost. I mean, some of the things that have happened, and I'm a little concerned about the emphasis of where is metadata practice actually going, and the supporting of DEI, because as many people know, many of these types of much of this type of work is work that is happening either with local authorities or, well, this is one area I think that linked data and linked open data could actually play a really strong role. There are initiatives that are going on within NISO, the NISO diversity issue, participating in some of the OCLC diversity conversations that are going on. PCC has a diversity advisory group. And even within one of the user groups that I participate in, Aluna, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion group that's specifically looking at search applications and relevancy ranking and potential bias within article metadata. So there are many things that could actually be done at very low cost. My concern, though, is that on the one hand, if there are questions about what's happening in the metadata area, much of the DEI work that places like University of Windsor is doing, or University of Oklahoma, they just moved Tulsa Race Riot over to Tulsa Race Massacre. That type of authority work isn't going to be done without the metadata team able to do that work. Not all of it can be done with SACO. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, so those are some really important points about practical applications of metadata and some of the really fundamental principles of librarianship to move forward the accessibility of collections and to bring diverse voices into our collections in ways that we haven't yet considered, and make sure that we're bearing in mind representation as we speak about diversity. I'd like to move to the next set of questions that we have for our panelists, still in the realm of library practices, the things that we do in the library day in and day out. I'd like to consider the closely related areas of open access and open educational resources. When we spoke about these as a group when we were preparing for this panel, we said, well, you know, OA and OER are not really the same thing, but we kept coming back to talking about them in closely related ways because of the idea of openness. So I'd like to consider the idea that when we think about affordable learning initiatives at academic institutions, the libraries that responded to the survey indicated that they were leading 35% of these programs, and more than 75% of libraries are involved with open educational resources in some way, whether it's generating the content or making it accessible. Also related to that is that the idea of supporting faculty through course materials is a very important part of the library's mission. So for our panelists, what I'd like to know is, what are some of the approaches that your library employs to demonstrate your support of open access and open educational resource initiatives? And in particular, how can libraries gain more visibility with faculty, as well as across the institution, with what they're already doing in this area, maybe in addition to new initiatives? Tracy, if I can start with you, your reaction to these questions.
Oh, there's so much. So 2 minutes. Okay. So for us, we're definitely working towards not just moving our institution, but to the public institutions in the state of Florida towards a pay-to-publish open model rather than a pay-to-read. And it's difficult for us as a state university system because we are not like SUNY or Cal State, in which we are so all similar. We're all very, very different. And so we have our high-level research institutions, and then we have those of us that are sort of at the other end that are still regional universities. But we are trying to do that as best we can. The other way is for us as an institution to build capacity within our IR so that we can publish more open access, including journal publishing of the research areas that FGCU is known for, such as coastal water management and entrepreneurship. And the second, OER, is become an extremely important thing sort of politically in the state of Florida. The Board of Governors is now asking for institutions to report on the cost of textbooks to their students and the opportunities that students have to save money. And our provost was just grilled by a Board of Trustees member on this topic. So for the library to be asked to lead the Affordable Text Initiative at our institution is an honor, but also extremely important that we do it well. And so we're doing things like making it easier for faculty to incorporate library materials into their courses, particularly within the course management system, and also to work across campus with the faculty on incentivizing the use of OER or affordable alternatives to textbooks, and make it easy for them to do so, because we all know that redesigning a course is a lot of work, and a lot of our courses are based upon the textbook that we've adopted. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and lucky for us, we have been asked to lead it, and we're doing our best to carry on that torch.
Thanks, Tracy. Sandra, over to you for your thoughts on open access and open educational resources and your reactions to these questions.
Thanks. Again, a big topic. I agree with Tracy. We have invested a lot in terms of human resources. So we have several positions and a team that supports open access and really promotes that. And there are these requirements coming down from especially the tri-agency, the federal funding agencies that have for some time required open deposit of publications, and one of them research data, and now there is a rollout of requirements for research data to be deposited as well. So we are investing heavily in that area. We see it as a huge opportunity for the library and research data management, and it is something that we work with various groups across campus. So it's a really good integrating way to work with research on campus and computing on campus to develop services for that. Another kind of interesting approach that our group has taken is to a project that we call Modifying Acquisitions Practices. So it's it's again trying to work on dismantling that big deal approach and look at another more sustainable publishing model, and saying that we are going to, it's based on a larger study that came out of Université de Montréal, but in a journal usage project. But basically it's looking at usage and also consulting with faculty on what they see as their most important journals, and then assessing and analyzing those, and offering, promoting that we will get you the information, but it might just be in a different way. It might not be immediate. It might not be that invisible way that you just take for granted, but you might actually have to wait for a couple hours, 30 minutes, or 12 hours or something with products like Rapid ILL, or at one time it was Reprints Desk. So it does add a lot of visibility and a lot of consultation and a lot of education of the faculty and what they're actually getting. And again, that invisibility is something when we're succeeding, we're invisible a lot of the time, and that's something we need to see how we can communicate about. So those are just some thoughts.
And it seems to me that there are quite likely tie-ins between the idea of thinking about reconsidering your acquisitions models and our first question about DEI, that we can tie those two together. Alan, I'd like to move over to you to once again bring things home with this questions. Your thought on open access and open educational resources in library practice these days.
First of all, I'm just in awe of what Tracy and Sandra are doing with respect to OER. Being from a smaller school, I'm kind of jealous about it. I'm hoping I'm not going to sound one note, but the thing that I'm really concerned about here is the issue of, and this may sound like a cliche, but open is free as in kittens and not necessarily free as in beer. And so I think the part that I'm really looking forward to hearing about are the maintenance models for this, as well as things like link rot and other types of issues that have been problematic, at least with some of the open access initiatives that have gone on up to this point. I think that some of this will require not just the instructional design piece, but as we start thinking about the migration of content from platform to platform, what does that look like in terms of updating knowledge bases for these types of materials? And this is a place where I see there being some real leadership in being able to create places very similar to the Directory of Open Access Journal and the Directory of Open Access books that I think we should be thinking about components for OER to have a similar type of clearinghouse.
Yeah, lots of important practical considerations, I think, with OER as well, that, just to say that we want to do it is not enough. We need to consider how we go about doing it as well, and how sustainable the access is. I'd like to move on to our next family of questions, which has to do with collections. We'll start with budgets. Again, with the idea of the magical budget increase, wouldn't we all love to see this? More than 65% of the respondents to our survey said, or around 65% said, that if they had a magical budget increase of 25% next year, they would acquire more e-resources. We also saw that people expected to acquire more e-resources within the next year. This is, of course, a long-standing shift in our profession and the way that we are putting together collections in academic libraries. What I'd like to hear about from the panelists in this area is it easier to articulate the need for e-resources funding than it might be for other areas of the collection? And, here's one that I think we'd all like some sort of a silver bullet answer to. What are the keys to securing new funding for new library initiatives? If something bubbles up and it's brand new, or if new programs appear, how do you go about securing funding with that? For this question, I'd like to start with Tracy. So Tracy, over to you.
Well, it's really interesting that that we're talking about this, because our provost has gathered our cabinet together to meet with deans as we put together our 5-year budgets. So for the first time, I'm having to project 5 years into the future what I'm going to need for my staffing and for my collections, as well as some other things. And one of the things that I think is really helpful as we move forward is the fact that we have a strategic plan that identifies the needs of the university, not just the needs of the library and what we would like to do, but what the university is trying to accomplish in the next decade. And this means with us partnering and working with with our colleges across the campus, as well as some other departments such as digital learning, the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, et cetera. So as long as we can show how we're advancing the initiatives of those areas by the investment in the library, I think it positions us well as far as the requests that we're making over the next 5 years. Now, as far as e-resources being easier than other areas, I would have to say no. I think that our provosts, I think presidents, vice presidents of finance are weary of paying 5 to 6%, and in some cases 10% increases in licensed products, and that of course includes our e-resources. So as we provide them information about what we're trying to do with open access and switching the model to pay to publish, and then showing the fact that there's a potential for increase in the scholarly impact of our faculty and our students on our campus, I think helps to make the case better than continuing to pay these these increasing costs every single year. They understand and they feel bad, but at the same time, the university budget is not increasing by 5, 6, and 10% annually. And when it does increase, it's for specific initiatives. So it's important to pay attention to those and to find where the library fits into those initiatives.
Yeah, I really like that idea of lining up the library with the university strategic plan as a way to make sure that the budget requests are heard. Alan, I'd like to move to you for your thoughts on this question.
Well, I just want to echo what Tracy said about that e-resources aren't as easy to manage. I mean, they're in some ways they require a different set of skills than some of the things that have happening with the print inventory. And I think as a profession, we've done a really great job of transitioning that, but I still think we have a ways to go. I think in particular, one of the lessons from COVID was that e-resources are a heck of a lot easier to manage when you lose access to your print material, and thinking about all the services and other types of things that we built around that. I mean, the controlled digital lending conversation is happening now, and many things that we're focusing on kind of the new. One of my colleagues at my institution, as well as my UL, many of them have been focusing on what's the service that we're delivering, and not just thinking about is there ever an exploding balloon of content that we need to be delivering to our students. And I think that particularly in those types of cases, things like resource sharing, things like CDL, these are new services that the pandemic may have brought, but I think that they're just as fundable, if not more so now, than they ever have been. I think this is going to sound horrible to say, but it took the pandemic in order for us to get our stuff together to actually really mobilize around controlled digital lending. And so sometimes it takes a crisis. I think that's one of those situations. I think especially with the inflators that Tracy was citing, and the lack of parity between the university budget and the what's happening in other areas, that those types of increases are unsustainable in the long term.
And finally, last but not least, Sandra, I'd like to hear from you about your reaction to these questions about budgets.
Yeah, quickly, I would agree, definitely aligning with the university's strategic priorities in whatever way that makes sense, which usually do include the student experience and the research, if research intensive, in a research intensive environment. Collaborations, I heard that as well. That whole controlled digital lending thing is really a fascinating approach when you realize how the digital lending is just so much easier, and that really there are these archaic, let's call them archaic, rules around lending digital content and controlling that. So if we can change those things. I'm also just thinking we're quite a residential school here, so the pandemic also highlighted the need for space. Again, we know that already, but just that need for student space and the need to move collections to online options to clear the space, but also trying to make sure that it's understood that the library is not just about space either. It can take on a life of its own, like the library is a place to go study, yes, and so much more. So just a few thoughts there.
I think my reaction to what all three of you have said is that this idea of crisis being an important way to affect change is something that really resonates, but that I think one of the big challenges for us is to line that up with the equally important idea that the institution's strategic priorities are to some extent guiding the way that we are thinking about budgets. And at times in the last 2 years, it has been very difficult to figure out where those things intersect. So that's my reaction to all of your answers. Moving to our next set of questions, still within the big tent of collections, which I think is, in some ways maybe the biggest tent that we deal with as librarians. I want to now think about the priorities and mission of the institution and the library itself. Respondents to our survey said that student retention and engagement were the most important way to contribute to the institution's mission as the library, and providing a top-tier patron experience and teaching research and information skills were also ranked very high in our respondents, in the responses to the survey. I'd like to hear from our panelists about how your collection development priorities might line up with ideas like student engagement and retention, and if you see a connection between supporting these priorities and other priorities in the survey, in particular diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives. Are these connected to the idea of student retention and engagement? For this question, I'd like to start with Alan.
So one of the things I'll say is that our head of research and instruction, she tells me, in terms of the patron engagement, the fact that chat services are up 300% from where they were prior to pandemic says to me that students are changing the way that they're engaging with staff in very real ways, and the reference and instruction folks are rising to meet that challenge. I think that's to have that level of engagement with patrons is really critical. But even when it comes to different types of customizations or other types of work that we're working on at the new school, a lot of the customizations that we're working on are about different ways of getting the material to students. And so whether we have a small little request widget that takes all the bibliographic information from request and sends it to Elliott. Elliott pushes it into now it's moving from our Easy Borrow network. There's a lot of automation that's happening, and one of the things we see, particularly because of the kind of Amazon or Amazoogle type of experience, students are expecting that delivery window to collapse, and it is. And we're having to figure out ways that we don't need that type of human intervention in order to automate some of that. I think where things are really challenged, and this goes to the equity, the DEI initiatives, is that different types of vendors, as well as different types of indexes, don't necessarily start with the same cards in terms of content. And so there have been a lot of challenges between vendors when it comes to actually indexing, and more importantly, discovering that content and then finding a provider of that content when I'm not a subscriber of that database. That's easier with certain vendors, that's harder with others. And so I think the more that those types of either exclusive metadata relationships continue to occur, or those types of paywalls, basically, students respond with their feet. And so I think from a student engagement point of view, when we look at the customer journey, we have to look at the discovery to delivery. And one of the things that I'm hoping that we get out of CDL is a look inside service for many of these books, because it's that type of mass digitization effort can actually lead to a whole bunch of other services. That is a really exciting time now.
I'd like to next move to Tracy. Tracy, your reaction to these questions about the institutional and library priorities and mission in the realm of collection development.
So I'm with Alan. I think moving to things such as DDA, where our students are driving the collection development of our library, is really exciting. And some of the things that he talked about certainly will make it easier for them to make those decisions. But we have actually moved our entire firm budget into DDA. even faculty requests. So if a faculty member wants a particular title, our librarian pushes that. If it's not already in the DDA collection, then they push it to it. And then the purchase will be triggered if in fact they do use the actual material, because we have plenty of evidence that shows even the faculty requested items never get used, whether they're electronic or in print. And so for us, this has been a way that we believe in, and hopefully we have seen a nice change in our collection over time, and we hope that it will only continue. It is definitely much easier to sell this model to the university administration, because they are very well aware of the fact that the majority of our collection does not get used. And they do not like spending money on resources that nobody ever utilizes. So you are able to do two things. You're able to meet the mission of the library by being more engaged with the students, and also hopefully we're encouraging all students to be empowered in the collection development of our library collection.
It's such an interesting way to market the collection too, to say that the entire collection is demand-driven acquisition. I think that's a really novel approach. Sandra, I'd like you to wrap up our conversation about these questions about institutional priority and mission with relation to collection development. Your thoughts in this area?
One thing when I think about the DEI or EDII is that is highly relevant to students right now. We see that everywhere. So focusing and highlighting the collections that we have, developing them, making more inclusive collections of all types available, I think does engage their interest. And there's a lot of coursework on this, and course reserves. We have an improved course reserves system, and it's a really great way to promote make it easy for students to engage with resources that their faculty are also using. So that idea of what's really used, it's definitely used in that way, and also promotes the copyright compliance that we do require for all of those resources that aren't open in the way that we would like. So just also just quickly, I think you see a lot of libraries focusing on user experience as well. There's lots of positions out there. We're keen on going there ourselves. So just trying to understand the user experience of students and really engage with them and improve the online public service for them in a way that is relevant for them.
Yep. Give them a good user experience, and with any luck, they'll keep coming back. So, yeah. Our next question will be the last question of the afternoon. We have so much we could be talking about, and I think other questions that we as a panel had prepared to possibly address. But with the time constraints, I think we'll cut ourselves off after this next question. I'd like to talk about resource sharing. And the questions that we're thinking about in this area have to do with the challenges that the survey identified, specifically the top two challenges, the costs related to borrowing activities in the area of resource sharing and the turnaround time. I'm wondering if our panelists can speak to these issues. In your experience, are the interlibrary loan tools that you have available addressing these challenges better than before? And what recent developments have been made to address them and have a positive impact on libraries in these areas? Sandra, I'd like to stick with you as the first respondent to these questions about resource sharing. Your thoughts here.
So the answer to the first question, I think, yes, the tools are better. We are able to lend better and better and more efficiently. We at Queen's and in Ontario, we are members of a consortium that is now 18 of the 21 libraries in Ontario of the university libraries, and we have moved into that automated fulfillment network just over the summer, and it's tremendous smoothing experience for lending, and that covering those distances where people can pick up, drop off at different schools and really facilitating that. And other tools like Rapid ILL and those other things I was talking about. I think one of the things that we've realized is we all know digital is easier to lend. So, it doesn't need all of that. So, and then this emphasis on ebooks that we've already touched on and how that model needs to be expanded at the very least and figure out how we can do more lending of the digital in an easier way. We already have moved into a lot more scanning than we did in the past. And, the other thing long-term that we're looking at is getting to that collective collection idea. So of the 18 of the 21 in Ontario, really, we're all doing things individually, spending money individually, managing individually. How can we, over time, get to more of a radical collaboration on how we manage that collection as one for our students and faculty and researchers in Ontario? And then, of course, we always have to go beyond pretty fast as well. But it is an amazing, I did notice in that article that came out about the Library Journal survey, it's talking about how it's much bigger than just the sharing of collections. It's sharing of expertise, it's sharing of discovery, and all those things are definitely coming into play. So the more we can broaden that out, resource sharing just seems to become a different beast, you could say, than the old ILL.
I like that phrase, radical collaboration. I think maybe we would get more attention outside of libraries if we called it radical collaboration instead of resource sharing. Maybe it's something to think about and take that one up to the streets. Alan, I'd like to move to you. I know that resource sharing is an area that's near and dear to your heart and to your institution. If you could give us your thoughts on these questions.
Well, given the fact that 50% of our lending is actually from other people or books from other places, I mean, it's something that, as I said, is just going to scale. So I think that, and in fact, that may even be higher now. So I think, again, with CDL and other types of materials or other types of delivery mechanisms, this is a place where nobody wants to be digitizing the same book 100 times. So thinking about how these assets could either be managed within the community zone or within network zones, within borrowing, within fulfillment networks, is going to be a really critical piece towards sharing that expertise. I think the other thing, and I'm going to just make a quick plea because I've got the mic here, this is really important for librarians to become involved in the standards that and the information standards that are actually used by these applications. Some of the work that that I've been involved in has really been to think about how can we take the existing information protocols that we have and extend them. So, for example, not only are we thinking about CDL, but we're also thinking about shareable ebook licenses. And how do you do that at the kind of network protocol level, as well as how do you do that from, for example, within eBook Central or those types of things. Those conversations and those pilots are going on now. So I hope that the audience here doesn't look at vendors as the ones who are developing these services. The services actually get developed through a collaboration where the librarians and the vendors are actually working together towards a common goal. NYU and New School are involved in an ebook ILL pilot with a number of other schools, and this is something that is incredibly exciting to be involved in. And so I just see resource sharing just going to 11, as it were, once this type of capacity is built.
I think that's a very important set of points that you've made about the role that we all have to play in developing these models and about the practical considerations for how resource sharing might work in new models. Tracy, I'd like to ask you to wrap up this question, in fact, the panel discussion portion of the day. What are your thoughts about these big philosophical questions about resource sharing that the survey has posed to us?
I think that what we're seeing is that we have done such a great job with resource sharing, and each year we get better and better at it. So now our faculty and our students have very high expectations of us in this area. And so we do have big challenges with CDL and ebook sharing and many other issues. In Florida, we just adopted in July our first unified library catalog. And we, of course, are now having our patrons see that 11 out of the 12 of us have access to a particular item, and they don't see why we can't get it very quickly. But then there's an issue of ebook licensing. So there are a tall order. I really recommend that everyone that is participating today, you go back to your group of library leaders and have conversations about this survey. One of the best things about being on this panel was the prep for the panel, and the fact that the 3 of us or the 5 of us got to have conversations about all of these issues that we're all dealing with. And it's so great to share what we're doing, but also learn from each other of better ways to attack these challenges and these opportunities. So have fun with the data once you get it.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with that. The prep sessions for this, I almost wish we could publish some outtakes, like when you go to the movies, because people had really interesting thoughts. And again, there's so much we could say, and we would really love to be able to discuss this with all of you in person. Along those lines, I'd like to move to the Q&A section of the session at this time. Jane will be selecting questions and reading them, and then we will ask our panelists for their thoughts. We have about 5 minutes, so maybe we'll just go with 1 or 2 reactions to each question. But Jane, I'll pass the microphone over to you to present some Q&A questions to the panelists.
Thanks, Katy. We've gotten some wonderful questions posted. I'm going to have to cherry pick in order to sort of stay within time. But the very first question was, when will the survey itself be published? And I would say that's going to be early in November. There were a number of questions about print books, OER, etc. So Gabriel asked, what is the future of books in an OER and remote future? So maybe, Alan, you could start with that. Did we lose Alan?
Oh, give me the easy one. I actually think the role of print books, and someone else actually said it in the questions. I think we need to think very carefully about the container or the wrapper of that information and the actual delivery of it. And I think that print is not going to be going away. So we really do need to be bolstering our delivery services in very creative ways, the same way that we did with the pandemic. I mean, CDL, for example, meant that we had to have access to our physical stacks so that we could digitize our material. And so it didn't mean that we just lost access to things. So I don't see open access being something that's going to be kind of take on, or even ebooks to take on. I think that we're actually going to see print and CDL and EILL and ebooks as basically complementary to one another when it comes to the tipping point of when you can digitize something versus when you can't, and how that material is delivered. So I think it's going to be different based on the resources at each institution, but I do think that I see a continuum as opposed to seeing them as competitive or oppositional.
Thank you. I want to ask just Sandra and Tracy quickly if either one of you have another response there.
I can just say that, sorry, I'll just quickly say, in the pandemic, I think one thing we learned was just how valuable the print is to some researchers, some types of print, and that wrestling match about how to trust emergency temporary access service. I can't take books out because I have the online, it's quite an interesting story, and that whole CDL, just tying something to that physical item, it just seems like someday we'll get beyond this when the reality of the digital frees the content. But I'll stop there.
I would
Tracy?
just echo what Sandra and Alan said. So they did a great job.
Thanks. So we got a great question from Stephen, and Tracy, I'm going to ask you to start with the answer to this one. Have any of the presenters organized campus-wide committees to tackle the textbook affordability challenge? And if not, why not? And if so, what is the library's role?
So yes, as a matter of fact, the provost asked me to lead the initiative. And so I first started working with the Faculty Senate and a couple of their committees. And now they have been recruiting on our behalf, on the provost and the library's behalf, on putting together a task force to make recommendations to the university for the resources that need to be available to faculty in order to ramp up the use of affordable textbook materials. So our role is to provide as much assistance as we can. I know one of the questions was, what about maximizing the resources the library already licenses? Absolutely, as well as the things that are on our shelves. And also look at what are some things that we can purchase that would be a low cost for the university, that would then have a scalability for the number of students that would be able to have access to it. So we are very much involved. The majority of the folks on the task force are librarians, and the rest, of course, are people throughout the institution that can provide support to our faculty and including faculty themselves.
Okay, thank you. I know Alan has to drop. I just want to see if Sandra has any comments about this question.
I think that's an amazing initiative. I don't think where we are is still at a point where at least we are able to do this. We offer some grants, some small grants, a few per year, to encourage faculty to develop open textbooks or some other form of OER now we're onto, so that we are getting an increasing uptake now, more applicants than we can support. So that's a start, but it's nothing. I appreciate what Tracy is moving forward there.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to have to wrap. I think I echo everybody who has participated today in thanking our audience very, very much, as well as our great panelists. We got terrifically thoughtful questions. We will try to respond somehow to the ones we did not get to address in person right now. Please watch for the report, which, as I said, should be out in just a couple of weeks. And I think what we're seeing here is that we have seen a tremendous amount of change in the past 18 months. We're all trying to grapple with that in the various initiatives that we have going on. And at the heart of it is that we are all trying to serve our users and our institutions. And so for that, of course, that is at the heart of our profession. And we're very grateful to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.